Welcome back to the channel, guys. This video is going to cover how to redo the rear glass on your Acura Legend with kind of a newer look. Those old crusty moldings that are around the back glass, I've got the old ones sitting over here and you can see how they look. This happens to most Legends that I see. That stuff starts peeling off. No good way to restore them. First of all, the process I'm going to show you is going to require you to remove the back glass from the car. The molding that we're going to use, it hooks around the edge of the glass, and it kind of relies on the urethane bead that sets the glass in to hold it in place, even though it does come preloaded with butyl so that you can kind of stick it on there. That butyl is not meant to hold it on there. The process that I'm going to use involves removing all the little studs that are up against this edge here. They look like that, but you've got all those studs all the way around the edge, and there's also holes for the clip on the back in these little recessions here. So on this car, I was painting everything already, so I planned all this out and I grinded off every single one of those studs nice and flush with the metal so they wouldn't be interfering with the rubber. And what I mean is, the way we're going to be installing it, if that stuff was still there, they would put little lumps that you might see once the installation's complete. So that's one thing to consider. Do you want to go as far as weld up every single one of these holes like I did? If you're not planning on doing any paint work, then you could possibly very, very carefully grind off the studs and just don't go past this edge. Mask it off, use duct tape, whatever you got to do to protect your existing paint. But at the end of the day, if you want to do it the way I'm doing it, you're going to have to paint the inside of this area here up against the pinch weld and up against this edge where those studs are. You're going to have to cover it up with something. Now what I did after doing all my grinding and welding, I coated that bare metal with epoxy. These cars, they're old. You're going to have to realize that when you remove that glass, you may find some surface rust that's creeping up under the urethane bed or along this pinch weld somewhere. And I think you'll also find pretty much every Legend I've ever taken apart, when you take these roof moldings off, you're going to find cracks in the seam sealer. And there's nothing to seal that up except for the seam sealer. Your roof molding does not seal whatsoever. Every bit of water that's falling on your roof runs down in this channel, and you will eventually end up with some serious rust and cancer going on inside your roof if something's not done about it. So that's something else you might want to take care of while we're doing this process. If you were able to mask off your existing paint on either side and be real careful cleaning out the old seam sealer, maybe you won't have to repaint. Another thing that I would consider while you've got either the back glass or the windshield out on a Legend, maybe you want to get your headliner redone. It's not such a big deal on a coupe because you can wiggle the headliner out of the big long door openings for the coupe doors. They are wide enough to get it through there, but on a sedan, I doubt you would be able to get the headliner out without folding it or creasing it somewhere. So while you have the glass out, good idea to have that headliner reupholstered if it needs it. One more thing to consider while you have the glass out. Is your tint starting to fade? Is it starting to get purple? Do you want to redo that tint at some point? Might want to think about that while the glass is out, because on this car right here, that tint had been on there for probably every bit of 25 years, and it was so cooked on, it was very difficult to get off. That's what I'll say. I got a whole nother video on the channel that'll show you the troubles I had with that and the method I had to use that ended up very time consuming, very tedious, but I was able to get all that tint off, and I'm still working on it at this point. I've got a few more dabs of tint and adhesive still on here, but most of it's clean. Basically, you don't want to take razor blades to this back glass. You'll end up damaging the heater strips. Any little cut on any one of those and that whole strip's not going to work. So razor blades is not a good option, so check out that video if you want a good way to get that old crusty tint off if it's cooked on like mine was. So I do realize there's some things being discussed in this video that are a little bit beyond the average do-it-yourselfer. If you're not a body shop guy, you're not a glass guy, handling the glass, removing the glass from the car, installing the glass. This is all stuff that's pretty specialized and delicate procedures. So my official recommendation is that you have a glass professional, and I mean glass professional. Most body shops don't do their own glass these days. They call somebody that's all they do is glass, to do all of their removal and installation of glass. So just going to any old body shop to have them help you take the glass out is not going to be an option. My recommendation for that would be to find somebody who does it privately, not somebody that works for a large chain like Safelite or somebody. You need somebody who has their own business and does their own work. Small business guy. He's going to be the most knowledgeable and the most likely to be able to take your OEM glass out without breaking it. If you do feel squirrely and you want to try and do it yourself, like I said, it's very labor intensive. It takes a lot of back strength and arm strength, but I got that glass out 100% with this tool only. This is called a cold knife. Little 90-degree blade on it, and you have to stick that blade in between the glass and the car and turn it 90 degrees and start cutting that urethane like that. Now the reason I say it's hard on your back is because you have to kind of push with this to keep this vertical while you're pulling with the other hand on the cord. You're constantly twisting your back. You're constantly using all the upper body strength you have to cut that urethane. And it is tough. It is tough to do. But doing it manually with a tool like this is the best chance you have of getting it out without breaking it. And you need to make sure you've cut every little bit of that urethane all the way through there before you start trying to take that glass out. If you feel any resistance whatsoever, stop and find where the urethane is still holding on. 1 little inch of it still in there will cause your glass to break when you try to pull that glass out. If you think you have a piece that's kind of smushed in too far for that blade to reach, you can get you a tool like this pretty cheaply. It's just got a regular razor blade in the end of it, and you can kind of get somebody to pull the glass outward from the outside while you get inside the car and try to find that piece cutting along the edge from inside. Don't use any automatic tools on this old car. And the reason I say that is because when this glass is put in this car at the factory, it's smushed down pretty far. Your OEM moldings that go around the edge, they kind of bridge a gap. There's a big difference between how low this sits and how high this sits, how low the glass sits up here and how high this sits, and that molding bridges the gap. Doing this glass with the aftermarket moldings, I'm actually going to end up with it sitting a little bit higher. I'm going to have a thicker bead of urethane. It's real easy to get in there with that tool and cut when it's a thicker bead of urethane, but from the factory, these were smashed down really hard. It's a really thin gap. If you get in there with an automatic tool, you're going to break the glass, you're going to scratch the paint, you're going to do all kinds of things to your interior that you're not going to like. So use the manual tools. Again, my official recommendation is to have a glass professional remove your glass for you. So I'm ready to dry fit this glass and show you some different types of moldings that you can use and some different options that you have. For the most part, we're probably going to end up using the 19mm flex line universal molding. If you want to buy a whole roll, there's your part number, 75-foot roll. It's not terribly expensive. You can find sellers on Amazon and eBay that sell it in shorter lengths. I think you can get like a 15-foot section for about 25 bucks or so. I bought a whole roll because I'm doing this kind of work all the time. I'm also going to show you some different options. These are also flex line moldings. This one's a 24mm and that's a 31mm. And I'm probably going to end up using one of those sizes on this back glass. So first up, we are looking at the flex line 19mm. For reference, this is going to be the right side up method. This is the way the molding was intended and designed to go on, to where it kind of overlaps the panel a little bit. I want to show you that we've got our gaps nice and even along the curvature here. This gap here might be a little bit wider than OEM, but to make everything nice and even all the way around where we want to be to see what these moldings are going to look like. The 19mm, as you can see, installing right side up, comes right to that edge. I'm not really happy about how it does that right here. But you can visualize that gap doesn't change from there to there. You'll be able to bring that 19mm down here. But our lip gets wider as we get to the bottom of the glass. So it's not going to be right to the edge. It's going to start to drop below the edge as we get back here. This is not the way that I am thinking about installing these moldings, but if you do want to go with right side up, you may want to go with the 24mm, and that way it slightly overlaps here and here, overlaps the quarter, and might end up being closer to right even with the edge as we get to the back. So I've made a couple adjustments here. I closed the gap up a little bit at the top to where this would actually overlap these edges and maybe look a little bit better. You see there's a few wrinkles, though. Don't worry about the wrinkles. You can heat gun on this rubber and it will straighten out. That's just from it being coiled up in a circle on a roll inside the box, but they will flatten out. Even just some heat from the sun will straighten that out later. But like I said, I closed up that gap to where that would overlap slightly, if that's the look you're going for. The 24mm, I got a strip of it down here to where it overlaps and just ends up being right at the edge down here in this corner. And I didn't try to make this cut perfect, just trying to demonstrate what you might have to do. This is the 31mm, and it doesn't completely cover where your clip holes are going to be. On this car I welded them up because I didn't want any leakage, and this molding is not going to prevent your leakage. You're going to have to seal those holes up some kind of way. So ideally, I want to see if I can find something that's a little bit longer. If I could get another 1/2 inch to where it comes all the way down here, I'd be real happy. So I'm going to be on the lookout for that. Now me personally, I don't like the look. This looks like a cheap Civic front windshield OEM molding, where it's a big hump of rubber that's overlapping the paint like that. And that's not really what I'm going for with this. I'm going to show you the next method that we're going to call the upside down method, and we'll see what that looks like. So this is the upside down method. This is the method that I'm kind of leaning towards at this point. You can see, instead of it making a curve up over the edge like this, it kind of comes down and makes a little trough. The glass ends up being more flush with the roof, and the only part that's really sticking up is this half of the channel. One downside to it is it's going to take a little more prep in these corners. The way it's stretching around this tight curve, it's wanting to lip up right there. After doing a little heat gunning and putting a little bit of adhesive in there, And I did that really fast. I can probably do it a little bit better when I'm actually ready to put this stuff on and install. So as I mentioned, it's going to make a channel doing it upside down. Your water kind of has somewhere to go and flow out. And so another benefit of doing it upside down, something that I like, is the way I'm able to make the cut. I'm still going to have to use the right side up method for the bottom lip, because obviously I don't want that big piece of 31 millimeter just curving outward away from the car. So it's going to set like that, but I can make me a nice little clean cut, stick it on there with some adhesive, and the piece underneath where the 19 millimeter stops, I can make me a fancy cut to where this kind of overlaps like that. The water will go through a little hole. The water's kind of got somewhere to go and flow on out the trunk trough. So we got it taped into place right where we want it. We want to press firmly all the way in and flat up against the glass. Try to get the outside corner of the channel all the way up against the corner of the glass. Completely close this gap. This is the trickiest part right in here. It wants to kind of pooch out at this edge. I used a heat gun and applied some heat all in this area and then put the tape on. Again, got it really tight up against there so we don't end up with a gap in the corner. Got that done all the way around to about this point here. It's a little longer than we need. We're going to end up trimming a little bit back to where the quarter panel stops at the trunk lid, but we'll get to that in a minute. So now with everything held in place on the outside, you apply your primer. Get at least a 1/4 inch of rubber and a 1/4 inch of the glass all along that seam. So you see I squirted a big bead of urethane up against the crack between rubber and glass. Not too much, you don't want to build it up too high. You got to keep in mind when we're ready to install this thing, we got to run another bead of urethane right next to it on the actual mounting surface. So it'd be a good idea not to build it up too high, because you're going to want your main cushion of urethane to be the installation bead, not this bead. It's just to hold the rubber on. I'm also going to smooth this out with a spreader, make it nice and even. After smoothing it out, and it's important that you smooth it out really nice, we want our installation bead of urethane to have a nice even surface to make contact with. We'll get that nice and smooth all the way around. Try not to get it places you don't want it. So I flipped the glass right side up and just gonna let gravity keep everything down where I want it. I want to make sure that edge is staying all the way up against the glass. Double check all this stuff. Re-tape it if you have to while the urethane's still wet. Once it dries, it's there permanently, so make sure all your lines are straight and this rubber is in the exact position that you want it. Everything's holding real tight on this one, so I'm going to leave it sitting overnight. Let that cure. So this is just a dry fit to make sure our adhesive is holding the rubber when we push the glass down in there, the lip is constantly pushed on by the body, and we want to make sure that seal or the molding is not rolling away from the body with that pressure on it. That's why we've gone to all this trouble to glue it on first, to make sure that doesn't happen and everything looks nice and uniform. So I'll still be able to pull it back. The adhesive's right there. You can see how we made this cut. Straight here, angled there. So we get everything taped, make sure we're pushed flush up against the 19mm, and don't stretch it as you tape it down. Make sure it's kind of compressing just slightly. We don't want any shrinkage later on ending up widening our gap later. So don't stretch it as you go, but let it kind of naturally sit, and then compress it. Don't stretch it, compress it, and then tape it down. It's really optional if you want to glue this piece on ahead of time the same way we did for the upper section. It's not being pushed on by the body like the rest of it is, so you can literally glue this on after you've installed the glass if that's the way you want to do it. I glued mine on first. So you see I just applied the windshield urethane primer again, and same process, just put a bead of urethane across there and smoothed it out. And again, it's really important to have a smooth surface for your installation bead of urethane so you get a good seal. So just like we did for the upper molding, for this strip at the bottom, we flip the glass back over so we're not fighting gravity. We'll make sure that's sitting down fully against the glass and it's pushed all the way onto the edge. Double check our tape, make sure everything is sitting exactly where we want it. Did a little taping to where we could see that we're nice and flush. Just like that. So you see, even I got the help of my glass guys that come by our shop to actually apply the urethane for us and help me set the glass in, because they have a fancy tool that will dispense that urethane nice and evenly. It's not a hand pump tool. We also want to use a high viscosity urethane. You don't want a windshield urethane that's runny at all. We want the glass to sit slightly higher than it did from the factory, and we put a lot of thought and a lot of test fitting into figuring out how we wanted to do that and how thick we wanted the bead to be. It's at least a 1/2 inch thick. It's extremely thick, especially at the top. And if you watch him in real speed here in this video clip, he runs very, very slow when he starts at the top of that windshield. And but as we get down around the rear curve of the glass, he does start moving a little bit faster. So it is thicker up top than it is down at the bottom, and that was calculated. I'm just showing you every detail so that you see how I got the results that I did. I also want to point out another detail. If you look directly above the gas door, there's a spot where the pinch weld, where your urethane bed is going to be, it kind of rises up. It makes a little hump. Now obviously your glass is going to be a very straight, smooth line. So there is a spot where if you don't get the urethane thick enough on either side of that hump, you're not going to get a good seal, because the glass is going to stop setting down when it hits that hump, and you may end up with a gap. So go with a really thick bead, set it by pushing down, and at no point do you want to have to pull back out on the glass to bring it back up. We want to push down and stop at a certain point and stop messing with it. And you'll see we do some adjustment as we're pushing it down a little bit, and we move it side to side, up and down. We kind of have to push that seal at the top of the glass up against the roof panel to get it in the exact position that I want it, and kind of tape it in place and let it cure. So here's what the finished product looked like. I'm 100% satisfied with how it turned out. I would do it this way again. To sum things up, if you wanted to use the 19mm or 24mm in the right side up fashion all the way around, you could do that without having to grind off the studs. It would just be a really wide rubber lip all the way around that kind of overlaps your paint. I think using the 31mm would be way too wide to use all the way around like that. I would probably use 19mm if I was to do the right side up method, but I just really like the way it is upside down and the way it turned out. We took this car to the National Acura Legend Meet in Lexington, Kentucky this year. We won cleanest engine bay and got a lot of accolades, a lot of support from everybody else. Really appreciated all the work that went into the car. I'm going to be making more videos of how I restored different parts on the car, different alternative methods for parts you can't get, and just everything we can do to improve the cosmetic condition of the old Legend. So stay tuned on the channel and click that like and subscribe button if you want to see more Legend videos. Keep the legend alive.